In this episode of Booked on Rock, the story of a young man chasing his dreams amid turbulent times. After losing his girlfriend, his band, and his best friend, he has to decide, is chasing his dream worth the cost? That's coming up next with author and musician Peter McDade.
We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock. I'm Eric Senich. Our guest this episode is Peter McDade. He is the author of King Cal. Welcome to the podcast, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
There's also a soundtrack to this book, which we'll cover. But let's start with the book.
Okay.
The promo states, quote, many novels set in the world of rock music depict stardom, debauchery, and deceit. King Cal instead focuses on the creative process, the devotion required to choose an uncertain life in music, the inspiration for songwriting, and the challenge of making the rent while making art. So let's start off with what inspired this book, which is a classic book that is, it's actually about to turn 100, this particular book. This story is inspired by the Virginia Woolf book from 1925, Mrs. Dalloway. I'm very interested in hearing about this. For those not familiar with that book, by the way, what is it about and how does it connect with this book, King Cal?
I had never read Virginia Woolf. I was an English major in college, and I did my best to avoid Virginia Woolf because I had this idea she was very stuffy. But during the COVID lockdown, I was in, I think, 300 online book groups just as a way to maintain my sanity. And some of them wanted to read Mrs. Dalloway, and I loved it. It was funnier than I expected, and it's all one day in the life of this woman. And what you see over the course of the day is how her past is always with her. Like she's walking around and she's shopping, and she's not doing anything too dramatic, but those thoughts from the past are with her all day long. But she's also very wealthy. Like the big crisis is her dress is ripped and she's got a party that night. And will the maid fix it in time? There's no stressors of money. And so we talked about the book in the Zoom group, and I said, I'd love to read a book like this just one day, but in the life of somebody for whom money is a big deal. Like literally having enough money to get home would actually be a challenge. And having served the fast food career myself for a few years, I thought, like some fast food guy, he's got to work, and it's 24 hours in his life, so I'll begin and end with his first order in the drive-thru. And that's all I had. And then from there, I wanted to see I had to figure out who he was and what was he doing the rest of the time that made him willing to work a fast food job.
It's a story of fiction, but it's most certainly rooted in reality, and it's clearly hit home with those musicians who know what it's like to pursue a dream as a musician. Among them, Elliot Easton of the Cars, who praised the book, who, by the way, makes an appearance in this book. I like that story where we'll get to that one. Dan Wilson, the Grammy-winning singer and songwriter of Semisonic, who wrote the song Closing Time, says, quote, King Cal is a glorious and gripping story of the early days of a musician's life, that uncertain, chaotic time when a young dreamer begins to transform into an artist. I have never read a more accurate or emotionally affecting portrayal of that transformation. Warmth, humor, sadness, grime, joy, feeling broken, being broke, they're all in the mix. You have lived the life of the main character in this book, Calvin. Tell us about your background as a musician.
In ninth grade, I joined a band with my three best friends, and we graduated high school in New Jersey and moved down to Atlanta to be big rock stars. I mean, up until my early 30s, it's what we did. Everything was sacrificed for the band. We put out 7 records. We made it onto a major label. We got dropped from the major label. We made it onto another major label, and we got dropped from the major label.
What were the labels, by the way?
We got signed to Atlantic Records, and we put out one with Atlantic. And then, this was back when every indie band, this is like the birth of modern rock, going from college to those modern rock stations, K-Rock, and here in Atlanta it was 99X. It became big money. Pearl Jam and Nirvana had broken, and labels were looking for college bands. The good news is they were signing a lot of them. The bad news is they were signing a lot of them. And the method is we throw it all out there and we see which ones take off. So we got signed to Atlantic, and then they didn't pick up the option for the second record. And so then we got signed to Sony. Our producer at the time got an imprint with Sony, and he signed us. And we put out a record with Sony. In retrospect, these records did well, but the model is such that unless you're selling hundreds of thousands of copies, there's no way for the label to consider you worth it.
Sure. At that time, yeah. Much
Yeah.
different now, but at
It
that
is much
time,
different now, and the
very
model
true.
has become like I watch a band like Wilco, right, who now operates outside of the label machine altogether. They have their own imprint, they get distribution, they sell X number of copies. It's not platinum or anything, but it's enough that they're making money and they're touring, and it's a new model that is working a lot.
Was the name of the band King Cal?
The name of the band was Uncle Green. That was the band we started in ninth grade. King
Okay.
Cal it's the name for the book. And I did work at Burger King for those first couple of years.
Yeah, interesting. So now you're still a musician, but you teach history to college undergrads. Tell us about how your journey took you there.
Well, when you're 30 and your band decides that it can no longer make a go of it, after Sony, we almost signed with MCA. The guy who was going to sign us got fired. You're starting all over again. You're 30. We decided to move on, and I went to college as a 30-year-old. And I got a degree in history and English and then a master's in history and started teaching. It's not unlike being on stage, is what I've learned. I describe it as like I've got a 45-minute lecture and like a 45-minute set, right? You want to start with something exciting to kind of get them engaged. You're going to lose a few about halfway through, and then you've got to end with something strong, right, to leave them something to think about.
Sure.
So I teach history, I teach drums, and I write books.
Did you get to open for some big acts when you were on those labels?
We did. We toured a bunch with Matthew Sweet. Remember him,
Yeah.
his girlfriend back in the day?
Oh, yeah. My sister's got a baby girl named Evangeline.
Oh,
And
no
I was
way.
telling her, I said, there's a song called Evangeline, Matthew
I
Sweet.
love that song, that
Yeah.
record.
From
We toured
Canada,
to
Matthew Sweet,
the
right?
Girlfriend record and the 100% Fun record.
Oh, yeah. They were huge all over the radio. So you,
It was
okay.
great.
You
We
toured with
opened-
Matthew Sweet?
Toured with Matthew Sweet. We toured with Semisonic. We toured with the Black Crowes for a while. The Black Crowes started in Atlanta. They were Mr. Crow's Garden at the time and opened for us at one point, which, I think
Get out, man. Wow.
we
Holy-
also beat them in wiffle ball in our front yard.
Did you really?
They have the market here, yes. This before they had. I don't know if you know Steve Gorman was their drummer for
Sure.
the prime years, and he's on the radio now.
He's on the big radio guy. Yeah, he put out a
He
book
always
too.
makes me add the footnote that he was not in band yet when we beat them in the front yard. It might have been different if Steve was there.
Yeah.
Driving and Crying, who you remember?
Oh my God, yes.
Played with
Sure.
them. These were all bands that started at the same time, and you start and you have that sense of community, and then some of them escape the bubble and move out into the world, and lots of my really talented friends didn't. I mean, you just never know which key's gonna be the one that unlocks it all.
But no regrets, huh? I would think.
No. With some distance, I look back and I think, I've seen 46 of the 50 states, and I've played all across the country, and I've got more stories than people want to hear about everything that happened, the good stuff and the bad stuff. And, now I'm here in a very comfortable house, and I get to teach young kids drums, and I get to write books. Really kind of argue with. I mean,
Right. Worked
part
out
of me
great
still
for you.
wishes I had that McCartney plane, right, that would take me from gig to gig. But
Yeah. I'm just curious as to how the Black Crowes ended up on your front lawn.
well, we all lived in the same town, and we played with them a bunch because we were starting out at the same time.
So they just hung out at your place. You hung out at their place.
Yes, and I'm sure at some point somebody was talking smack about wiffle ball, and probably Chris, the lead singer of the Black Crowes, and probably Jeff, who's the guitarist in our Uncle Green. Well, at some point, somebody threw down the marker and said, "Let's go." And we
That's a
took
great
care of
story.
business. Yeah.
So let's get to know the main character, Calvin, some more. Who is Calvin?
Calvin is 22 and was born in a small town in Florida. This town does exist. I was looking for a small town to put him in, and there's a town called Mayo, Florida, which is named after not the condiment, but a Confederate general named Mayo, like 1,400 people. And so Calvin comes from a somewhat broken home. The parents got divorced, but they were never particularly happy. But he makes one best friend, Grady, and the two of them, it's just the two of them, begin to play music together. Grady plays guitar, Calvin plays keyboards, and they go from working up cover songs to writing their own music. And they're going to go to Atlanta to become big rock stars.
As you mentioned the Virginia Woolf connection there. It's laid out it's all in one day, and we start off at 12:35 a.m. That's the first entry. So as the story moves along, it's like a diary and a day in the life of.
Yes, I really wanted that sense to come across about what he has to do on a daily basis in order to, move the ball down the field a little bit. So he's got to constantly be writing songs and thinking of songs because he's the guy in the band who writes them, and he's figured out that that's the key to the whole thing, is having enough good songs for a couple of them to break out. He's got to work because he needs to pay the rent. At one point, he has to come home and he has to Venmo the rent money to the guy in the house who's in charge of collecting the rent, and realizes he's broke, and deal with the other roommates and with Grady, with his bandmate, and with his girlfriend, like all that in one day. So it's really, on the surface level, it's not a super exciting day. At the same time, you realize how much is going through his head all the time as he's trying to work all this out.
Booked on Rock Podcast. We'll be back after this. The opening scene, he's working at the burger joint and he's observing the customers as they come in. And there's the guy listening to Pearl Jam and he's softly crying. You describe him as having Buddy Holly glasses too small for his head, rumpled button-down shirt hanging loosely off his skinny frame. Oh, sad Pearl Jam fan. But Calvin relates to this guy, and he also connects with the coworkers like Kendall. And I thought that was interesting because as an artist, you're observing all the things around you. So he's taking these stories and kind of putting it into his art. Right? I mean, that's what an artist does. You're observing. He's aware of this, right? This character's aware of all that, right? He starts coming up with lyrics in his head throughout the day based on what people are telling him and what he's seeing.
Yeah, and I'm glad you see it that way, because that's what I'm hoping, is like to not be too overt about it. But yes, he's learned to watch all the time. I mean, part of it is just to keep himself entertained over the course of, running a drive-through for 8 hours at a fast food place. At the same time, it's looking for material for songs. And I also like to think that you see that he's empathizing with these people, even some of the people who drive him crazy, or some of the customers who he's on one hand sort of softly mocking, like, oh, sad Pearl Jam fan. At the same time, like, he also feels for this guy, because like who comes to a burger place at 6 a.m, like sort of crying,
Right. What's he thinking? What's he
car.
feeling?
Like,
Yeah.
How did you get to that point?
Yeah, all those things are song ideas, right?
Yeah. And you see over the course of the day, these lyrics kind of popping in and out of his head, and he'll be looking for the rhythm to be right. He'll come up with an idea and instantly realize, like, that's a terrible idea, because that's how it works, right? You have a whole bunch of stuff, and you've got to begin to sort of edit yourself as you go along about what's worth keeping and what's just needs to be tossed out the window.
Yeah, he was trying to avoid making friends with people at work because he felt like that job's not me. This is just what I do to make a living. But he can't help but empathize with these people. Yeah.
Yes, he's concerned with having real Calvin, who, goes home. He's the musician. He's a songwriter. At the same time, he can't make it all 8 hours without actually getting some sort of connection with these people.
Let's talk about Melly. Trying to chase a dream as a musician can get complicated, especially when that musician is in love. And he's in love with Melly. He's talking about when he first sees her at a gig he played at, which was in somebody's garage.
Yep.
You write, even more than her natural beauty and this inner glow she seemed to have, Calvin was struck by the way she moved. She danced around the large garage with ease, arms drifting through space so gracefully that she appeared to be floating. And while she looked like she was by herself, it also looked like she was dancing with everyone else all at once. Calvin couldn't remember being that comfortable anywhere besides hiding behind his keyboard. What becomes of their relationship, and how does it play a role in the storyline of this book?
I mean, that moment when he sees her, right? He's drawn to how natural she is in the world, because he's never been that way. And I think he never stands a chance with her. And at first she does go for Grady, who is the guy who does all the singing in the band, and he's got that floppy hair he can kind of, toss around. But as they talk and as she gets to know him, he begins to stand a chance with Melly. And as the book opens, she's no longer with Grady, they've been together for almost a year, and he has this idea that the two of them can actually wind up like living together, like he can really make a go of this. But you're right, that's another stressor on the relationship because she's graduated college. She's got parents who expect her at some point to go to grad school and ideally marry like an engineer or a doctor or something. And that is not Calvin. He's never going to be a doctor or an engineer. And he's going to struggle often to even have the rent. And so it's also a stressor for her because I think what draws her to Calvin is this love of music, this idea that he loves something, right? I'm always drawn to people who love whatever it is they love to do. It makes them so much more interesting because they're engaged with the universe, right?
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, the thing she loves about him also means that he's really always going to struggle for money, and she's always going to have to kind of fight for space within his head, within his life, with the music.
And Grady is in a band with somebody Calvin is not a fan of, and that is Roddy.
As I was saying earlier, you start off on the scene and you're all local bands, but if somebody begins to rise, to break out of that scene, you're happy for them, of course. As, your better angel, you are thrilled that your friends are making it, but some small part of you is also thinking like, why is it them and not me? And especially in this case, because Roddy is kind of, and this is no offense to, to front men or front people, Roddy's like pure ego.
Yeah.
Which is really what makes, at the end of the day, it's really what a successful front man has to be, right? More often than not, it's like
Eddie Van Halen called it lead singer disease, LSD.
Yes. At the same time, Eddie
dealt
Van
with
Halen
a few
was
of those
happy
guys.
that he found somebody,
Sure.
right, who had the disease, who could sing his songs. And so Roddy is, unfortunately for everybody else, he's not as good as David Lee Roth or even Sammy Hagar. No offense, I always prefer the David Lee Roth period myself. But Roddy is pure ego, and he fronts this band called 143. And I had somebody ask what I imagined them sounding like when I first started, and I kind of imagined like a blues traveler, or maybe they started off like as kind of a jam cover band, but they began to write their own songs. And
Like a Spin Doctors.
yes, Spin Doctors is very good because, again, no offense to Spin Doctors fans, whatever floats your boat. But for me, I heard that first song, which of course sold like a zillion copies. I'm like,
Two Princes, yeah.
what is this? And so this is how Calvin feels watching 143. And they've hired Grady to be like a fill-in guitarist, because it's one of those bands that has 2 or 3 core members and then like 2 or 3 others that happen to be whoever they've hired for whatever tour. And they're doing so well that they're going to be playing that night, the day the book is set in at the night. They're playing a sold-out show at the Variety Playhouse, which here in Atlanta holds like 1,200 people. Like, it would be your dream as a local band. Selling at the Fox would be too much for you to have a daydream about, but I could sell at the Variety Playhouse. And so Grady is working with Roddy, which drives Calvin crazy.
And there's also Alex.
Alex is Calvin's younger sibling. Alex is born with the name Alice, is 6 years younger than Calvin, and the only one in the family that Calvin ever really connected with. And the two of them stay in touch and text and call quite frequently because Calvin has escaped, but Alice is still stuck at home. And Alex wants to be known as Alex. And the only person he's told this to is Calvin, that he would prefer the he, him pronouns, and he feels more like Alex than Alice. He doesn't know yet whether that means that he's more male or female or non-binary. He just knows that feels right. And Alex is the kind of name that could be either or neither. And Alex is a visual artist as opposed to Calvin being the musical artist. And they are kind of each other's familial life support system.
Booked on Rock Podcast. We'll be back after this.
And remember, my friend, future events such as these will affect you in the future.
Is Alex based on somebody real from your
No.
past?
Alex is based on...
Because I'm curious as to why that character's in this book. It makes it very interesting. It's a really complex character.
Yes, well, I'm glad you feel like that. When I'm writing these books, the characters, not to sound too mystical, the characters sort of appear. Like, I knew Calvin was picking up the phone at some point and part of my brain is like, well, I wonder who this is. Well, it's Alex. And that allows me to begin to see what other relationships Calvin would have. And then as a writer, you have to figure out which ones are worthy of taking up the limited space a book has. And Alex became more and more important as the book went along. So not based on anybody in particular. I do know people who have changed their names. I do know people who have changed their pronouns and then changed their pronouns back. And I guess to me, as the book went along, I realized that Alex was sort of searching along a similar path as Calvin in a way. Calvin changes his name later in the book when he's goes to start singing. He wants to be known as a different name. And the two of them, I just thought it was nice to see the two of them having each other, that as messed up as the adults in the family were, because the parents get divorced and they then remarry and they're still unhappy. But the siblings have begun to find their own family and provide that for each other.
Yeah, that's interesting. Peter McDade is the author of the new novel titled King Cal. There's a great conversation Cal has with a friend's brother, Ken. Ken is he's a kick-ass guitarist. Let's just put it that way.
Yep.
But he can't write songs. So he put down the guitar and joined the regular working world. He's encouraging Cal to search deep as a songwriter, write songs that nobody else can write but him. Can you talk about this scene? And is there a moment in your life that you tapped into for this scene?
I thought it was really important for Calvin to have kind of a mentor figure, and that's what Ken winds up being, even though Ken is no longer playing. There were some guys in high school, man, who you watched them play and you were like, you're walking amongst the rest of us little kids, but you are the real players. But, unless you land in that band where a lead guitarist is exactly what they need, right, to finish that sound, your options are going to be limited as you move on in the world, because it is the songs at the end of the day that are really going to give you a career, unless you're like a studio musician and they're out there and they're amazing. Right now, Bernard Purdy is knocking on my door like, come on, man, I can play anytime, anywhere with anybody. And in that scene, Ken has been following Calvin and Grady's songs. Their band is called Lords of the Living, and they're putting stuff on Bandcamp and trying to build a following anywhere they can. And Ken has been watching them and is watching the songs get better, but he wants to get Calvin to push himself even more. Like, there is, I think, a sense when you're young like that, and I'm no longer 22, I can confess, so I can say this. It's almost like you think you've peaked. And if things are coming easy, it's almost like, well, that's it, I've got it. But it's like, no, you just need to, you think you peaked, but you're just getting started. And if you would put in even more effort, like you think you peaked, so I'm done, right? I don't need to practice anymore. I got it. And I look back to what I was playing as a 22-year-old. I'm like, all the things I want to tell myself, like, slow down, practice more. Just because you can play all the notes doesn't mean you should play all the notes, So Ken is trying to get Calvin to take the songs he's writing, but then, yes, that phrase of like, only the songs that he can write, because there are lots of songwriters. Okay, you've made it up now to this level where you're a certain kind of gifted songwriter. You can put pieces together. But this next level, that's the level only you can reach, because it's only the songs Calvin can write. I don't know if there's a particular moment in my life that I've had that conversation, but I think it's more cumulative. With fiction, I was writing all the time when we were in the band, and I would type something up and I would type it a second time, and that would be revision, and I would think that I was done, right? When I got older and I began to workshop with other people, I realized, oh, what I thought was done is like really just the crappy first draft, and the rest of the work is going to come much later. It's almost like maybe I wish I'd had somebody at 22 come along and tell me, like, you can be pushing even more.
So you wanted a Ken, you needed a Ken to come along in your life.
Exactly. I feel like we had a few Kens as a band. I'll give a shout out to our high school music teacher. Mrs. Spiegel taught music theory, and we were seniors and maybe juniors. She found out we were in a band because we were in the same high school, same grade. And we were all taking music theory. And so she had us come play one day for the rest of the class. She got the auditorium. We played, and the class talked about, wrote little critiques of the songs and everything. It was great. And afterwards, she kept us. And actually, this is a moment that appears in the book. I nick this for the book. I give it to Ken at a different stage. And she kept us, and we're sitting. I can still see us sitting in the auditorium in high school. And she says, "So, what are you going to do?" And we're like, "Well, we're going to make songs, be big famous rock stars." She's like, "No, no, no. What concrete steps are you going to take to make this happen?" And it was the first time we thought of it in those terms, like, oh, it doesn't just happen. I can't just write great songs. I really have to push myself even further. We can't just walk outside when we graduate high school and say, "Okay, world, we're here. We're ready to be famous." So we booked studio time and we went and recorded our first songs at the studio in Morristown, New Jersey, and we still have it. I was not particularly good myself. It was the first time I really heard a bass drum recorded well, which was then the reminder of the lesson was, oh, what I do on the bass drum matters a lot more than what I think I do, right? Playing in somebody's living room, no PA, you don't really hear it all the time. And to hear how it fit into the rest of the music was a revelation.
This is where Elliot Easton comes in, right? This is he's referring to Elliot Easton as, Ken is referring to Elliot Easton as that type of guy where an amazing guitarist.
Yep.
He gets into a band where you got Benjamin Orr and Rick Ocasek, two guys who can write songs. And he fits in perfectly.
Two guys can both sing.
He helps those songs come to life. Very underrated guitarist, by the way, Elliot Easton, I think.
I think he's brilliant. And I think the songwriters knew he was brilliant because how many of those songs build perfectly to like that moment, right? Think of My Best Friend's Girl. Like when that lead comes in, it's just like, it's absolutely perfect. And you could argue, if Ken and Calvin got into a more theoretical discussion, you could argue that really he is writing. And maybe if Calvin was older, he would have taken Ken aside and said, like, that is writing. Like, don't undersell yourself. Like, I think that those guitars are as important, like that lead is as important as the rest of the song. And in some of their later songs, God bless them, I feel like the leads are even better sometimes than the songs that they're surrounded by. But that's what Ken needed. Ken needed to land with a couple of songwriters who could then use him, Clem Burke just passed away.
I just saw that from Blondie.
The drummer from Blondie. And if you listen to some of those Blondie's records, it's like Debbie Harry and Chris Stein, they wrote songs. And I think they realized they had this drummer. There's a couple of songs like Dreaming. I think that's just, you go, Clem, go crazy. And that becomes as important as the rest of the song.
David Hepworth, the author, recently on said, drummers are the thumbprint of the band.
Oh, I like that.
Perfect, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Elliot Easton, did you work with him along the way, or how did that?
No, that was the miracle of King Cal. I didn't even know that we were shooting for Elliot Easton. When a book is getting ready, like I handed this thing in 8 or 9 months ago so that you can get the lead time, you can put it together. And then there's this thing where you try to get blurbs. So basically you're trying to get people to read the book, to say a few words. Ira Robbins, who runs Trouser Press Books, which was born out of Trouser Press magazine, which was back in the 70s and 80s, and I think on into the 90s. He didn't even tell me, but he happened to have Elliot Easton's email, and he sent Elliot the book, just like out of the blue. Like, here's a book. It's about a musician. And Elliot was kind enough to read it and send along this blurb. So I was able to just get an email one day, like the header was something like "new blurb!" And it was from Elliot Easton.
Was he already in the book, or did you put him in the
book? And that's what triggered the Trouser Press guy thinking like, oh wait, I have Elliot's email. Let me send him this, this book.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was great.
Booked on Rock Podcast. We'll be back after this.
I swear I'll make it up to you.
Friendships can be put to a serious test in the music business, and I say this in reference to the moment towards the end of the book where Cal is telling his friend Grady that he's finished songs that the two had started writing together. He figured Cal was going to wait until Grady returns from the road with Roddy's band Lord of the Living. Talk about this scene, and again, are you tapping into some real-life experiences for this one?
I was in that band. I like to say I'm still in that band because we never officially broke up, and I still talk to them all the time since I was 14, right? So I'm not going to do the math now, but multiple decades. And so there are multiple stories, and all those stretches where you are like four fingers of one hand, like the tightest unit, and then there's that week where you won't even talk to one of them because like you're just over it, like forget it. In this moment, it was the way the band worked was would write music, but he had trouble writing the melodies. So Grady would write the melodies for the songs, for the vocal lines, and then Calvin would use those melodies to write some words. But Grady was that missing component, right? That vocal line to be woven through the songs. And so no song could be finished without Grady. But then he was gone, and it was supposed to be 4 weeks, and it turned into 4 months. And Calvin realizes that Calvin's own mental health at this point needs to keep writing songs. Like that's what without it, at this point, it's so ingrained that he feels like he's walking backwards. So he finishes some songs, and I don't think he intended to even tell Grady. In fact, he knows it's got to happen at some point, but part of the tension earlier in the book is like, when am I going to tell people about these songs? But it's that moment where they're beginning to kind of cut a little at each other, and it's something Calvin needs to reveal to almost defend himself to Grady. Maybe unaware of how much it would hurt Grady, and maybe it's a moment where Grady realizes how hurt he would be at the idea of Calvin moving on without him. Again, they're 22, right? So it's hard to imagine future things happening, I think, at that age. So then when they happen, you're caught off guard and not really aware, not really sure about what to do with all this stuff that's you're thinking about because you're standing there with your best friend, but realizing that there might be some turns here that are being taken that you hadn't planned on.
And Cal is offered a gig to go on the road with Lord of the Living, but he doesn't want to take the offer. This leads to an argument he has with his girlfriend, Melly. Why doesn't he want the gig? And what is Melly's stance?
Calvin is all about his songwriting. I mean, he's really taken, you were right to point at that scene with Ken earlier. He's really kind of trying to tap into that idea Ken gave him, like there's only songs. What songs can only Calvin, write? He doesn't like the band. He doesn't like the music. I think also he has this problem with the idea that Roddy, the lead singer, would be basically his employer, right? Would you rather have your check cut by Burger Buddies Incorporated, the fast food chain, or Roddy, the egotistical lead singer? You might think that the lead singer, well, at least you're in the music world, right? And you're still doing that, but you're having to sell this thing that you love to do to somebody who's can do something with it you don't like necessarily. So he would prefer the job where he doesn't have to think about anything else all day long. But there's also this idea that he is writing these songs without Grady, and he is, as loath as he might be to say it out loud to Grady, he is finding that rewarding, right? The metaphorically and literally beginning to find his voice and what that means to what he actually might want. And Melly is confused about why you would turn down money to go play music.
Right. I was going to say this is art versus business. It's
Yep.
the music business, so he's got to decide.
Yep.
He's got to decide because you have to balance the two if you do want to make this your career. There's got to be some of
Exactly.
those decisions that you have to make. So
Not
she's
nearly
looking at the
the same
business.
scale, but-
She's saying this is a smart move business wise. Take it, put some money in your pocket, and which is actually pretty cool on her behalf because he's going to be on the road. So she's saying, don't worry about that.
Yeah. That we can use this money you'll make and you'll come back.
Right.
We'll get an apartment
She's thinking future.
and we'll move on to the next steps. But he's thinking about 6 months of using again, it's how much bandwidth do you have, right?
Right. And when you're 22, 6 months seems like a long time. 6 months is
it might
nothing.
as well be
right
like, you might as well be telling the kid it's like 30 years.
Yeah, it's like 6 minutes right now.
Jeez.
Yeah.
But when you're trying to write a couple songs a week or a song a day, 6 months is a long time. At my age, I'm much more of the attitude of like, you can do anything for 6 months, right? If I'm going to get X at the end of that, I'll suck it up and I'll do whatever I need to for 6 months. But he's 22 and he's also, I think he's beginning to realize all the number of decisions we have to make, right? Rolling through high school, when you think about it, there aren't really that many big life-changing decisions you have to make because aside from whether or not you're going to go to geometry that day, like it's pretty laid out for you.
Or am I going to ask that girl out?
Yes, exactly.
Is this the day?
Am I gonna spend the money I barely have on this guitar amp, or am I
Yeah.
gonna take
Or
her out to dinner? No, what's it gonna be?
for me, it was which two cassettes am I going to buy this week with the money I made? It was always twos. I bought it in twos. I'd have just enough for two cassettes.
See, I was a vinyl guy, but yes, you would
Vinyl,
have
yeah.
enough money for one. Which
Big
one is it gonna
decisions.
be?
Big decisions. Yeah.
And so he's got to make these big decisions, and he's realizing, right, that there's no one else there to make them. It's the good news, bad news. You spend your whole high school career wishing you could make the decisions and do the thing, and you finally get to make them, and then you realize, oh, crap, like that means I've actually got to make all the decisions and do all the things.
So what does Cal decide to do? We will leave that for those to read and
Yeah.
find out.
Yeah.
We cannot reveal that. But my question to you then is, Peters, is there a simple answer to knowing when to decide if you're going to continue to pursue your passion or decide to make a decision like you did, go to school, get yourself a good job, because that's a really difficult decision to make, to put that behind you. I think when you hit your 30s, I think it'll happen more likely at that point, but there's really no, what's the word I'm looking for, equation, or there's no simple answer.
Yeah,
It's a feeling that you have, maybe.
yeah, I like the idea of an equation. There's no formula where you can plug in, like,
A
I spent
formula,
X number of
yeah.
years and I've made Y number of dollars and I have, Z number of options left. Like it's a hunch thing. I mean, for the four of us, after the MCA deal fell through, we all met at a coffee shop, and the question was pretty straightforward. For whom amongst the four of us is the band still the thing? Like, is it the thing you sacrifice all other things for? Right? That's the moment Calvin's having without realizing it was hitting him already in that parking lot. Like, I'm sacrificing all this other stuff for my songs. Like, am I still ready to sacrifice everything else? You're 30 in a coffee shop and you've been through a couple of major label deals already. I think somebody's wife was pregnant. Like, do you have it in you? Maybe the formula is as simple as that. Do I have it in me to hop back into a van and basically start all over? I mean, we never made it to the bus level of rock life, but we made it to like the roadies, 2 roadies and an extra long van and a trailer. So like I had my own bench. I had my own bench and a guy who set up my drums. You're living large. 4 of us in a van willing to get back out there and start all over again. That's tough. I mean, and it's not to say that if the 4 of us had made the other choice, who knows what would have happened. And that's not to say those guys would have been wrong. I guess a large part of it too, like all these decisions we're talking about, you have to be able to make it and then really be at peace with whatever it is you decided. Maybe not immediately, but at some point you're going to have to be okay with not rolling the dice one more time.
You talk about there's no simple formula. Some will say it's best to not have a backup plan. But then you look at somebody like Tom Schultz of Boston who you go to MIT or whatever. There are a lot of these guys that do have a backup plan and they still make it.
Yep.
There are guys that don't have a backup plan. So you would think there's the drive there. It's all or nothing, but they don't make it.
Yeah. I mean, there's no single right answer. I mean, I'm not going to pass judgment on people who keep at it, right? You see the guys in, 45 or 50 and still thinking they're going to make it. Maybe they will. I don't know. I guess part of it is being at peace with the decision, and also, do you enjoy the process?
Right.
Right. Like for me and novels, I don't want to break anybody's bubble, but I am not going to make $1 million off King Cal. And my friends who are more successful as novelists, very few of them actually have a career off that. You're teaching or you're doing something else to fill in the gaps. But so why you're writing because you got stories to tell. You're writing because you like to write, and because I still enjoy the process, right? The challenge now of getting the pacing right, of getting the scene just right, of revising to figure out which paragraph you can kill. It only took me 20 years to realize if a paragraph isn't working, try just taking it away. And maybe that's the answer. Lessons from recording, right? You're killing yourself trying to get this one bridge right of the song. And then you realize, maybe the bridge is just not very good. Maybe we need a new bridge, or we just cut it and suddenly everything's better.
So you still love the process.
I love the process.
Yeah.
Still love recording. I have friends who, again, we're back to where we started, where technology has changed so much. I've got 4 microphones and I can get decent sounds, especially if there's somebody really good at mixing on the other end. And I've got friends who make records, they record them a bit at a time. They send me an MP3, I play along, I send it back. We're keeping our brains going and we're getting stuff out there in the world.
I think about like Rodney Dangerfield was like in his 60s when he all of a sudden makes it big as a comedian. There are those stories of somebody who can make it later in life.
Yeah.
There's no right or wrong. I think that's the answer. And I think we're in a great age now where if you do have a creative outlet, there are things that you can do now. You have access to. You can go on YouTube and play your music there.
Yep.
You could Bandcamp. There are places that you could, because that wasn't the case always. You didn't have places you had to go.
When we were starting, there was
you had to hope for a record label to sign you.
There was back then there was one formula. You're an indie band. We released the record first on our own. Then we had an indie record label here in town, but you're just trying to get that major label deal, thinking that that's going to do it. And really that just starts a whole new clock running of a whole new series of steps you have to go through in order to make it.
That's why I enjoy this book. One of the reasons I enjoy the book is because it gets that whole thought process going in my head again of art versus commerce. When is it time to stop pursuing your dreams? It's something I can relate to as a broadcaster. It's something I could never get out of my system. So I have a 9-to-5 job, but when I come home at night, I do this, and I love it.
And because you love the process.
Probably break even at the end of the month with what I take in,
you've got
and the cost
expectations, right?
Yeah.
But you're leaving behind a body of work. You're leaving behind all these episodes. Just today, I was listening to the David Bowie episode, which I missed earlier on.
Oh, yeah.
And I never really thought I was not a Tin Machine fan. I kind of checked out of that whole period. But then seeing in the arc, right, we've got this hour-long discussion now of taking Bowie from the peak of Let's Dance to the various ways he's trying to struggle. And then boom, all of a sudden there at the end, he makes these 2 amazing records at the end, right? And you look back and now we can see that whole story.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. That's all fascinating to me. But there's another example. There's somebody who is like David Bowie, had the fame, had the fortune. Now, why is he still doing it? Because he loves it.
Because he loves it.
Right. That's the big thing with a lot of these artists who will say, well, why bother making an album if you're not going to make any money off of it because of streaming services? Well, if you love it, you got fans, they're going to want to hear it.
And you're looking for other ways other measures of the success barometer. We all have like what a certain like successful thing is. Like I have in my mind what a successful book is, and it's not sales. Is first of all, do I feel it's complete when I look at it, when I read it for the 8 millionth time, right? Proofreading, looking for any missing comma or whatever it is, and then do I feel like it's connecting with anybody?
Right.
If it hits with the mark with 3 people, like, well, that's a success. And even just from this conversation, I can see that it worked for you.
It worked.
And,
yeah.
like what more could I possibly want? Like I took this imaginary kid in my head, inspired by a Zoom discussion of some book that's 100 years old. And it leads us to this discussion of modern art and modern commerce and what creative people go through in order to make the thing, right? That's
I tell you, one last comment on this, and then I want to ask you about the soundtrack. But I just finished reading a book Sean Egan wrote on Bob Dylan called Decade of Descent. Covers his music in the 60s and how influential, is putting it lightly, that music was, and how it changed the world. I mean, that's in the title of the book. And you talk about writing music that's individual to you. I mean, that guy, Dylan, I'm endlessly fascinated with that guy more and more as I get older. Are you a Dylan fan?
I am. And especially like, it's one of those, it's not unlike David Bowie, where now you have a large arc here. So you have this whole story of like all the periods he goes through.
Oh, the twists and turns and the things, just following his muse just throughout the decades.
the occasional like out of left field home runs. Like I don't know if you like Infidels, but I love that record.
Yes. Yeah, that's mid 80s. I
Yes,
think.
and
Yeah.
Joker Man is the first track on that song, and all of a sudden it begins. You're like, what?
That's got
Where did
Neighborhood
this come
Bully,
from?
right? Neighborhood Bully is
Yep.
on there,
Yep,
which I
yep.
love.
Sweetheart Like You.
Yes.
It's an amazing record. And so, yeah, Dylan is writing songs only Dylan can write, and some
Right.
of them are better than others.
Yeah.
And also
But
what's
then
good-
why does he decide to change his vocal style on the album with Lay Lady Lay? All of a sudden he's a crooner.
It's something that he
I'm
had in his head,
fascinated.
you know, and there are probably a gazillion other things he tried that didn't work as well that we'll never know about, but
Yeah.
went in the studio one day and he tried that and it worked.
Well, he talks about, Sean Egan talks in that book about that period where he was making demos with the band, in the basement of the Pink House,
Yeah, Big Pink.
at Big Pink, and they just were circulating, and then they finally got released. And the mystery there, what was he doing? Was he planning on something? Was he actually gonna release something with this band, or was it just him jamming with these guys? Who knows?
I think it's probably all the above, right? I mean, they're searching. At that point, he's like, well, there's something else out there, and I'm going to search for it. I'm searching for the next book idea. You're searching for good books that will work on the podcast. Like, we're all
Yeah.
out there gobbling stuff up. And that's why I love people who love to do something, whatever the thing is,
Yeah.
because they're out there finding stuff.
And everybody's got a passion for something, so just do it. Whether
Yep.
it's full-time, part-time, once a week, twice a week, whatever, just do it. The Booked on Rock podcast will be back after this.
Don't go away, gentlemen. We may need all of you.
Soundtrack to the book. There are songs by Lords of the Living, King Cal, and 143. Tell us about the songs on the album. Are they all written by you? All performed by you?
Well, I just write the words. So I outsource the music. I have, luckily, a whole stable of very indulgent and up for anything friends. So my first book in 2017 was called The Weight of Sound. And this will lead to this soundtrack. This is my third book, and each one has a soundtrack. The first book was about a band, shocker. And they had this one song that popped up in a couple of chapters. It was called Gardenia, and all I had was a couple of lines. But I thought it would be fun for the reader to be able to hear the song. So my friend Jeff, who I mentioned earlier is probably leading to the wiffle ball game. I met Jeff in third grade, and he was in Uncle Green. And still, he lives 10 minutes from me now. So I sent him an email like, would you want to write the music for a fictional band for the soundtrack for a book that may not even come out? Because I didn't even know where the book was going to go. And you need that friend who 2 minutes later writes back like, yes.
Yeah.
So he wrote the music and I wrote the words, and we recorded. It was so fun that we did a whole bunch for that book. I swore I wouldn't do soundtrack for the second book, but then I did.
Yeah.
This one I knew there'd be a soundtrack going in because I knew once I saw who Calvin was, I knew how important the songs were to him. So there's 9 songs on the soundtrack. 7 of them are all written by my friend. The music is written by Chris Hauk, who lives in California. And he's a guy who he has a job, he has a full-time job, and then he comes home and he puts out records under the name Norway House. And I played drums for him on a bunch of stuff. And Calvin is what I consider like a bedroom pop guy. So he's recording everything in his bedroom. You've got a laptop, you've got a few mics, maybe one real guitar amp, but then you're triggering drums and everything off your keyboard. And I asked Chris if he would write a song or two because I needed people who specialized in this. That's how he records. Luckily, he's the kind of friend who's like, yeah, how many songs do you need? Well, I might need like 6. And he said, sure. We wound up with 7. So he would write the music. I would have a title, a chorus. And the way he writes his music is he writes and this comes up in the book too. For the melodies, he just ba-ba-bas it. David Byrne called it speaking in tongues.
Right. Like placeholder.
Exactly.
Not lyrics. Sounds.
The sounds.
Yeah.
And then the verse pieces I would shape to mix to fit the melody he had. So he wrote 7, and then I needed 2 songs for 143 because they play at the end of Calvin's night, right? He goes to see Grady play this show. And this was a tricky assignment. I mean, Chris's assignment was tricky too. Like, go write 6 songs. And I think they kind of sound like this. I asked my friend Jeff to write the music for these. Calvin hates this band, but I wanted the reader, when they hear the songs, to understand how the band could have become successful. So they've got to be good, if also in some ways slightly annoying to people. So they've got this, their big hit is a song about beer. You know, my dear friend, Mr. Heineken.
Yeah, someone's going to ask you.
Shows, and Jeff.
And it's a good song.
It's a good song, exactly.
You can't help but like it.
You can't help but like it, but you can see
I'm going to
how
be playing
Calvin,
these. Yeah.
22 with his artistic morals would be like, it's a song about beer.
End of a long day, end of a long week. Got nothing to say, but I don't need to speak. No, I don't need to speak. You and me, we're as close as can be. Bittersweet until the bitter end. So I raise my glass to you, my dear friend, Mr. Heineken.
But he closes the show every night, and then when he's watching them play, he also hears them do a new song that he has to concede is actually good. It's called Almost Time to Fall in Love. So, but Jeff, I'm like, well, the other song, here's the words. Not that Jeff doesn't always write good songs, but I'm like, this one needs to be good. You know, like, it needs to sound like the same band, but also be a little not about beer. And so that's how that one came out.
I make mistakes all of my days, and I regret things that I say. Life can be hard. That's nothing new. And then the end sneaks up on you, sneaks up on me. Now it's almost time to fall in love. Lay down my cards or put them up.
Digital Meltdown. That's
Yeah.
credited to Lords of the Living.
In the book, it's actually I like to think they're all important songs, but it's a big moment in the book where Brady wants a new closing song, right? So it needs to be that song that you play at the end of the set. They're still mostly openings. So when you're an opener, you end with your best song so that the peak crowd sees you, because they're there to see the headliner. So when you start, there's usually very few people. By the time you finish as the opener, the crowd is much bigger because the headliner is about to go on. So Grady wants this new song, and it has to be upbeat. You know, it has to be something that everyone's going to like immediately. So that was the challenge I gave to Chris. I'm like, you know, I didn't have the title yet. I just had that one started with a vibe. Like, it needs to be something we can end a set with. And then he had a title, and then I wrote the words for the title, and then the music and the words all fit together. And
What's the title? Digital Meltdown. What's behind
Digital
that?
Meltdown. It's Calvin as only a 22-year-old can, I think, musing about when we really lose control of technology, which is, I think, from my point of view, it's funny that this 22-year-old thinks of it that way, because face it, 22-year-olds have been surrounded by technology. It's like literally the air they breathe. You know, you're born and here's your cell phone, like off you go. But he's beginning to wonder what's going to happen if, you know, if we really do all just become numbers and we all just, you know, we lose our humanity kind of thing.
I'm talking to myself just to see if I'm real. It's getting harder for me to know what I should feel. Living a life full of things we cannot see. It's zeros and ones telling us what we should do. Invisible threads pulling tighter on us every day. There's things we can see and there's things we can't see. Our world is getting in our way.
Another cool track is Hearing Melly Breathe, credited to King Cal.
We were talking earlier about when Grady goes on the road. And so this is the first song Calvin finishes without Grady. So it's the first time Calvin sings. And his idea is that he's just going to sing as a placeholder for Grady to come and do later on. But he writes the words. And this is also, I think, the first song that Calvin thinks of as like, it's really only a song Calvin could have written, because he's writing about listening to Melly, his girlfriend, and this just the sound of her breathing and how that can be enough for him. And so he sings it and takes on this persona, King Cal, because when he goes in to sing it as Calvin, he can't do it. He's hung up on all the baggage Calvin brings to any recording. But if he pretends he's Cal, right? Not unlike Alex becoming a new name. Like, now I'm Cal, so I can sing. Then that's why there's two versions of that song on the record, because he has to change it to Watching Mary Sleep, because he's not quite ready to come out and just have a song with Melly in it.
Gotcha. Okay.
He wants to go full John Lennon, with Oh Yoko, which is, just out there. It's a song about Yoko. I'm calling it Oh Yoko. But he's like, he hasn't even met Melly's parents yet. It's like the idea that they might hear, not that they ever would, but he's got in his head, like, what if they hear this creepy song about listening to our daughter breathe? Like, who are you? So he wants to change it to something else. So we hear two versions of it on the soundtrack.
Night sounds lost and strange. She's here, then gone again. Somewhere I'm someone else and I'm not myself. Night turns to swallow me. I don't know how to breathe. Something is holding me and I can't get free. I close my eyes to hear Melly breathe. I hide behind the shadows that she sees. Well, I'm so...
One of the first ones I knew would be a song was Heineken, because before even I was writing, I'm imagining Calvin's life, this idea of this kind of like band whose success he's annoyed by emerged. And I'm like, of course they would have a song about beer. It's like the big ending song. Like, I imagine 143 is, they start off as like a frat party band doing covers, and slowly they start to do their own songs. But what can they sing about? They sing about beer. And so I asked my friend Jeff to write it, and we had our friend Robbie Riss sing it. Robbie is an amazing musician, singer-songwriter in his own right. Trivia known as the guy who played Cousin Oliver in the Brady Bunch when he was much younger.
Whoa.
He grew up to become Robbie Rist, who, if you go search for Robbie Rist, he's got amazing stuff out there. Like, power pop, like, flows through Robbie's veins like nobody's business.
So I raise my glass to you, my dear friend. Mr. Heineken. And again. Yeah, again, Mr. Heineken. And again, and again, and again, and again, and again. Mr. Heineken.
Definitely remember him from Brady Bunch. Yeah.
And so we were looking for someone who could, Robbie's brief was to sing the beer song and to really go for it, but to also be able to sing this other song in like a much sweeter voice. So Mr. Heineken, I think, winds up being kind of more melancholic than I first thought of it in my head, just as a goofy song about beer. But that was also satisfying that as the song changes, then you can go back and you can also realize that it can deepen the text as well. And so Calvin will eventually have a conversation with that band's songwriter. And you realize the two of them, while they have different ends and different goals in mind, maybe are coming from the same place of trying to figure out how to turn their lives into music.
Booked on Rock Podcast. We'll be back after this.
Here to the future.
King Cal, it's out now. Where can people get the book and the soundtrack?
Actually, I'm going to send you to a couple of websites. If the King Cal soundtrack is on Bandcamp, all these are on my website. which is peterjmcdade.com, because somebody in Australia had petermcdade.com.
Oh,
Never does anything with it, but here I am. So I'm peterjmcdade.com. You can get the soundtrack on Bandcamp. You can also stream the soundtrack on Spotify. And the book is available wherever you buy your books. I always say, like, if you've got a cool indie bookstore in your town, you should go to it and they can order it for you if they don't have it already. Because one thing I love doing, I think at this point I'm hitting 10 different little indie bookstores, mainly in the Southeast. And it's like, I love these places and they're doing really well, even in this mega world, mega corporation environment. You can order it there. You can go to bookshop.org, which is an online site where they will, portion of the sale goes to indie bookstores. All these links are on my own website. There's also an audiobook. So any of your streaming services where you want to listen to audiobooks, if that's your jam, and there's an ebook. I got you covered.
Yeah. So you do the read on the audiobook?
No, I've learned what to outsource, and I've got a friend who's also a bass player. Doesn't play on this record. He's played on previous records. His name Tom Bowers, and he's an amazing bass player. One of those very melodic bass players, if you know what I'm talking about. Like, if you give him some room to roam, it's like all of a sudden, like, this new melody line has appeared. Are you an Elvis Costello fan?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
His bass player, Bruce Thomas.
Okay.
When he was with the Attractions. Anyway, Tom became an audiobook narrator. It's his gig. And so he's much better than I would be at doing the voices differently for different characters, but not being over the top, like ham actory, but like, so you can tell when different people are talking. There's a whole art to it.
Oh, absolutely.
But I love listening to him. And I've got lots of friends who like listening to him. So we also have that up for you.
Awesome. Peter McDade, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
That's it. It's in the books.